Hello. Yes, we're recording. Hello, everyone. Today we do our test shot with straight from San Francisco. We are talking with Patrick Ehlen. He's Chief Scientist Officer at a company called Brain Voice. Very interesting AI solution for the businesses and other purposes. The thing is, well, first of all, let's do a really quick stop and breathe the roses. Let's mention that the weather is absolutely perfect in San Francisco, in California in general. I'm enjoying it too. It's like really warm. You can tell by my appearance. I'm not in a jacket. That's a big sign. Usually I'm super cold. So let's be thankful to the weather, first of all. Second, Patrick, thank you so much for making it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
So we know that communications. My gosh, in general, communications. It's like the major, especially the more people involved, the more sophisticated system become. And we live literally our world. Doesn't matter what you do, starting from healthcare to any business solutions, involve a lot of stuff, like literally involve a lot of communications, and life of ours and of the businesses, for the most part, God's sake, we depend on really on the communications, on and not on anything else, because the way how we convey things, and moreover how we perceive things, it's absolutely different world. So
Yeah.
thank you. Agree? Do you agree with? Because communications, it's like it's entire discipline. It's so many theories behind, so many works, so many research done about it. Tell us a little bit about the things that you do, about the your company, and why do you think that's something really important?
Yeah. So, what you said is absolutely true. And I've been working in AI for a long time, but I also one of my main specialties was in human communication. I studied not computer science but psycholinguistics, and focusing on kind of the higher level aspects of how humans communicate to each other and convey concepts and understand concepts, and how we ever manage to get along talking to each other at all. And for a long time, you may or may not have noticed this, but AI was kind of focused on just getting machines to understand a person talking to one machine, right? So, for
Yes.
example, you have something like an Alexa or a Siri, and you ask it, what is the weather today? And it says, "Oh, Zhenya, it's a beautiful day. You should go outside, and you don't need a jacket," right? But that interaction, that communication, it's very much one way. It's a human talking to a machine, right? So it's human machine communication. um, and that's actually, I mean, it was a difficult thing to do, but that was actually a relatively simple thing to do, because when people know that they're talking to a machine, they tend to speak in a clearer way. They tend to use vocabulary that is more simple. They use simpler syntactic constructions in what they're saying. So in a way, we kind of dumb down our speech because we know we're talking to a computer and we want it to be able to understand this. And we do something very similar when we're talking to people. For example, if someone's from a foreign country and you're trying to communicate with them and you're not sure that they understand very well what you're saying, we adapt to each other in those same ways. That's just a human reflex to adapt our communication to the person that we're talking to. So because I did study human to human communication, I have always been focused in the AI side on studying machines understanding humans talking to other humans. That is actually a much more difficult problem, because when humans are talking to other humans, they don't make any of those assumptions about, I need to dumb this down for the computer. They assume that the other person can understand them. And their constructions are a lot more, complex. They might use more complex syntax. They might stop themselves in the middle of a sentence and restart it and say, well, let me rephrase it this way and blah, blah, blah. Stuff that we see humans do every day. But that makes it very difficult for a machine to understand in the same way that a person does.
Mhm.
So that has been the case up until fairly recently, and just to kind of accelerate up to the modern day, everyone, of course, now is familiar with ChatGPT, which is based on what we call large language models that are trained on very large amounts of data. A lot of that is communication data. Um, and we now see these systems coming out that seem like they are much better at understanding human to
Well,
human
let's point
conversations.
here. They're
Yeah.
better. The thing is, when I recently I dig a little bit deeper into idea of large language models, like idea of there are so many layers. It's a really sophisticated subject matter. So we can perceive that it somehow provides us, but the truth is it's still in the process of development, and the language, the human language, is still really sophisticated, like real human brain, how our brain perceives language. It's
Yep.
absolutely different level. So basically we can perceive that it's getting better, but there are a lot of ways of the development. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct about that. And when we say things like that a computer understands us, we don't really know. We don't have a good definition for what understanding even is for humans talking to other humans, let alone for a machine. So, I guess the best we can do is say that the machine seems to have some kind of internal representation that allows it to respond in an appropriate way, right? So, really, we're kind of looking at the inputs and the outputs here. We're back towards in psychology at the beginning of the 20th century, you had behaviorism, the advent of this whole idea that psychology should not make inferences about what's going on inside the mind, but basically just look at what is the input and then what is the behavior that is output from that, and make conclusions along those lines. So we're kind of at a point now where that's what we're doing with these large language models. If you ask it to write code for you that will give you make you a task list app for your phone or something, and it does what you asked for, well, it seems to understand what you said because the behavior that it outputs is in line with the
Mhm.
expectation of what you had with what you put in. Um, that said, there are lots of ways that the output of those systems is doing things that are not what humans would expect, right? So there are certain
Mhm.
kinds of maybe logic problems that they still don't get very well. Um, there are certain ways that, for example, you might ask ChatGPT one day, you might tell it about a problem that you're having and get its help on it. And if you go to a new conversation the next day, or say a week later or 2 weeks later, or something like that, if you were talking to your friend, they might remember and say, "Oh yeah, I remember you were talking about that," and yes, I remember that. The ChatGPT doesn't have the same kind of memory and contextualization inherent in the language model that you would expect from another human. So this is something that's also different. Is you might ask it something and it's like, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about." You're like, "Well, don't you remember just the other day I was asking you about this, right?" Um, so there are
Mhm.
still significant differences in the behavior that's output from these language models versus what you would see in a
Mhm.
human. Um, and that's why we have to be very skeptical of anyone who says, well, these AIs are becoming more and more human. They're doing things the way that humans do them. We don't know that, right?
Yes,
What
it
is
is.
interesting on these is that unlike a human brain, I mean, let me rephrase this because um, I was about to say we can't look inside a human brain, although there right now are some very interesting neuroscience experiments where people are uh, either putting electrodes into brains and looking at what those brains are doing at a very microscopic neuronal level. Uh, or there are more sophisticated kind of scanning devices. We've had EEG for a long time, but devices now that can look at a much smaller level, smaller
Areas.
number of neurons, a more
Mhm.
focused area, and so that's something we can do with brains. But with these AI models, with these language models, we can actually look at the neurons that are inside these models, and we can see which ones are activated, which ones are not activated, which ones are how information is activated throughout that model, and how that happens at the different layers of the model. So that's something that a lot of people are researching, and it's extremely interesting just for us to be able to say, okay, we've got the input and we can look at the output, but we can also kind of look at and start to infer why things are happening the way that they are inside those models.
Yes, you know what? Um, it's very complicated subject matter. I know that the human brain is adapts and changes so much, and sometimes like every single brain has its own like individual biochemistry. And the thing is, this biochemistry can change like this. Being like like a person with a chemistry background, I can tell like any single molecule involved like neurotransmitters, etc. Like even pH of molecule can change like depending on the environment, and that's like
Yep.
the entire way how molecule behaves in the environment will like change completely. So it's very interesting subject matter, because we don't have that much time. Let's talk about your company. So brain voice
VoiceBrain.
VoiceBrain, what,
Yes.
so what's for,
Yeah.
what it does?
So the idea behind VoiceBrain is, as I said, I've been interested for a long time in human to human conversation and understanding people talking to each other, either two people or larger groups. Um, so one area that we see this happening a lot in society is just on two-way radios. So there are lots of businesses and kind of situations where people need to communicate with each other, and they do that over radios because that's a great way for a group of people to coordinate.
Mm-hmm.
So examples are, if you go to a concert or a sports event, usually there are staff there. You've got security staff, you have janitorial staff, that sort of thing. Those people all have radios, and they're communicating like, hey, somebody made a mess in this bathroom, we need to clean it up. Or there's people getting too rowdy over in section 5, and can someone go over there and calm them down? That sort of thing. Um, you start to look for these radios and you'll start to see them everywhere. Like, this is really kind of a lifeblood undercurrent in the communication that holds our society together. Many, many businesses using radio communications
Okay, yes,
to kind of keep
everywhere.
things humming along. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Starting from retail, healthcare, and the way
yep.
how they how they did you see this super funny videos on YouTube with like a doctor sitting in the waiting room? It's like something is like blah blah blah, nobody can even understand but they're just jumping like just to make things done. I think it's sometimes it's very hard to understand, but they're on a very
Yeah.
very like internal unconscious level.
Yeah,
Understand
yeah. I didn't see that video. You'll have to send it to me. Um, but yeah, yeah. So there's all kinds of communications that are happening that right now. There's no real AI on top of that, and there are interesting conversations because a radio is a very weird thing from a communication standpoint. Like, if you have two people talking on a phone or on a video like we're doing right now, we can interrupt each other. We can nod, like you're nodding right now. In
Mhm.
psychology, we call
So
that
you can
back channeling.
understand. Mhm.
Yeah, we call it back channeling, which means like you nod, you're like, I know what you're saying, or you verbally back channel, you say, oh, right, oh, that's cool. Um, so on radios, you don't have first of all, you don't have that capacity for back channeling. And the reason is that radios are what are called half duplex, and that means only one person can talk at a time. So you push the button on the radio and you start talking, nobody else can talk now. You're taking up that radio frequency, and it's not until you take your hand off the button that somebody else can now put their hand on the button and talk, right? So you lose that whole kind of multi-channel ability that humans rely on for back channeling and other types of feedback. You also lose the ability for people to interrupt each other or do all these kinds of things that humans normally do to make
Mhm.
communications smooth. So for that reason, radio communications, conversations happening on radios are in many qualitative ways very different from ordinary conversations. And models that are trained to understand humans talking to each other tend not to do as well with these half duplex communications. Um, So that to me made it a very interesting problem for us to figure out, can we get machines that are actually good at understanding these radio communications that are in many ways very different from human to human conversations. Another aspect of those that makes them very different is because you're blocking anybody else from talking while you are talking on it and people can't interrupt you. What ends up happening is people find ways to make their communications very short. And that means creating like code names for people, creating lots of abbreviations for things, using acronyms for things. So you also get these communications that are very domain specific and even specific to that certain group of people who are talking there and have made agreements about this is how we're going to refer to this thing and this is how we're going to refer to that thing, but we're not going to use like the full name of those things. We're going to shorten it to these various things. So that's another way that it becomes a challenge for an AI model to understand them.
Oh my God, there are some, I aware like 100% there are so many challenges, especially if you're talking about acronyms, if you're talking about like even tiny like changes in the way how you pronounce everything related to there are so like layers of sophistication. It's extremely interesting subject matter because, well, our life literally, like, I'm not even talking about success, I'm talking about like simple wellness and survival.
Yeah.
Especially we live in a multicultural world, and that's it's extremely important to understand the basics. I know that you have to go. I know that you have to be prepared for the next meeting, and I know and you in the middle of the series. I will let you go for now, but only with the promise we will talk next time soon, right?
I would love that, Genya. We should
Okay.
definitely have a longer conversation when we can.
Yes.